"You'll never be anything," they mocked me at dinner. The next morning my father's boss entered, saluted and said, "Good morning, Colonel." In that moment, every fork froze midair. The camera pans across a crowded dining room, plates full, glasses clinking, laughter echoing. But then one voice cuts through, "You'll never be anything." The room doesn't flinch. No one defends me. I sit there invisible. Until the next morning when a single salute rewrites everything. That's when the silence finally speaks louder than their mockery. The gravy boat didn't break, but I wished it had. Maybe then someone would have looked away from me. Instead they stared, smirking, amused, entertained. My cousin Rafi, always the loudest, leaned back in his chair and said, "Still working at that dusty bookstore? What a future." The others laughed. I didn't. I kept my eyes on the lamb, perfectly roasted, untouched on my plate. My aunt, who wore judgment like perfume, leaned in close. Her voice was low but sharp enough to slice through my skin. "You'll never be anything," she said, like she was delivering a prophecy. I didn't react. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I just nodded slightly as if agreeing with her. But inside something cracked. Dad sat beside me, chewing slowly, methodically. He didn't look up. He didn't say a word. I waited for him to speak, to defend me, to do something. But he didn't. His silence was louder than their laughter. Felt like betrayal. Not because he agreed, but because he didn't stop them. Mom sat across the table. Her eyes met mine. They didn't soften. They didn't pity. They burned. Not with anger but with something deeper. Resolve. I didn't understand it then. But I held on to that look. It was the only thing that kept me from walking out. Dessert came. Gulab jamun, warm and sticky. I didn't touch it. I excused myself. No one noticed. I walked slowly to my room, the hallway dim and quiet. I didn't turn on the light. I sat by the window, watching the moon hang low over the backyard. The laughter from the dining room still reached me, muffled but persistent. I replayed every word, every jab, every moment of silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I made a vow. I would prove them wrong. Not with shouting or confrontation. I didn't want revenge in the way they might expect. I wanted transformation. I wanted to become someone they couldn't ignore. Someone they couldn't mock. I didn't know how yet. But I knew I would. Unable to sleep, I opened my drawer, searching for something, anything, to distract me. That's when I found it. A photo tucked beneath old notebooks and forgotten pens. My father, younger, in uniform. His posture was proud, his eyes determined. I stared at it for a long time. I had never asked about his past. He never talked about it. That night I did. I walked back to the living room. Most of the guests had left. Dad was sitting alone, sipping tea. I sat beside him and held up the photo. "Was this you?" I asked. He looked at it, then at me. "It was," he said. His voice was quiet, but there was weight in it. "I used to be someone." That sentence didn't feel sad. It felt like a door opening. I asked him to tell me more. He hesitated, then began. Stories of discipline, leadership, sacrifice. Missions he couldn't name. Friends he had lost. Honors he had earned. I listened, absorbing every word. It was like discovering a hidden chapter in a book I thought I knew. I asked him why he never spoke about it. He said, "Sometimes silence is easier." I didn't press. I just nodded. But inside something shifted. I saw him differently. I saw myself differently. The next morning I woke early. The house was quiet. I walked into the kitchen. My aunt was already there, gossiping with my cousins over tea. They didn't notice me. I poured myself a cup and sat at the edge of the room, listening. Then the front door opened. A man in uniform stepped in. Tall, composed, with an air of authority. He looked around, spotted my father and walked straight to him. Then he saluted. "Good morning, Colonel." The room froze. My aunt's teacup paused midair. My cousins stopped mid-sentence. No one moved. No one spoke. I watched their faces shift, from smugness to confusion to disbelief. My father stood slowly, returned the salute, and exchanged a few words with the man. I didn't hear them. I was too focused on the silence that had swallowed the room. Every fork had frozen midair. Every eye was on him. I looked at my aunt. Her mouth was slightly open. She looked at my father like she was seeing him for the first time. My cousins glanced at each other, unsure of what to say. The man in uniform nodded at me before leaving. I nodded back. That moment didn't erase the insults. It didn't undo the years of being overlooked. But it cracked something. It shifted the balance. They couldn't unsee what they had seen. They couldn't pretend anymore. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just finished my tea and walked out of the room. Later that day I found my mother folding laundry. I asked her if she had known the man would come. She said, "I asked him too." I stared at her. She didn't look up. She just kept folding. "Sometimes people need to be reminded," she said. I realized then that her strength wasn't loud. It was quiet, deliberate, and powerful. She had watched me suffer in silence, but she hadn't been passive. She had waited for the right moment. And she had delivered it. That night I sat by the window again. But this time I wasn't replaying insults. I was planning. I didn't know what my path would look like yet. But I knew I had one. And I knew I wouldn't walk it alone. The joke at the table had become the question mark. And soon I would become the answer. Dad didn't say a word as he stepped out onto the porch. The morning sun was soft, casting long shadows across the cracked cement. I followed him, still holding the photo from last night. He sat down on the wooden bench, the one with the chipped armrest, and stared out at the empty street. I stood beside him, unsure how to begin. "What did that salute mean?" I asked finally. He didn't look at me. He just exhaled slowly like he'd been holding that breath for years. "It meant respect," he said. "It meant recognition. It meant remembering who I was." I sat down next to him, waiting. He didn't rush. He never did. After a long pause he began to speak, not like a storyteller but like someone unlocking a vault. He told me about the academy, the grueling training the first time he was deployed. He spoke of nights spent in freezing tents, of friendships forged in silence, of missions that blurred the line between duty and survival. He had been decorated more than once. Medals for bravery, for leadership, for saving lives. He had led a unit through a conflict zone where no one expected them to return. They did. Because of him. I listened stunned. Not just by the stories but by the fact that he had kept them hidden. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked. He looked at me then. "Because I didn't want you to carry it," he said. "The weight of it. The noise. The loss." I felt proud. But I also felt angry. Angry that he had let them mock him. Angry that he had let me sit at that table, surrounded by smears, while his legacy sat buried in silence. Later that day I found Mom in the kitchen slicing mangoes with the precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. I asked her why Dad had left the army. She didn't stop slicing. "I begged him to," she said. I leaned against the counter. "Why?" She placed a slice on a plate and handed it to me. "Because I didn't want to lose him," she said. "Every time he left, I didn't know if he'd come back. I couldn't live like that." Her voice didn't tremble. It was steady like her hands. I realized then that her strength wasn't in grand gestures. It was in the quiet choices. The sacrifices no one saw. "He gave it up for me," she added. "And then he gave up talking about it. Because he didn't want to make me relive it." I looked at her differently after that. She wasn't just the woman who packed lunches and folded laundry. She was the reason he was still here. She was the anchor that held him steady when the world tried to pull him away. That afternoon the house was quieter than usual. My cousins had retreated to their rooms. My aunt kept herself busy in the garden, pretending to be fascinated by the roses. No one mentioned the salute. No one dared. I walked past them without a word. Their discomfort hung in the air like smoke. They couldn't unsee what they had seen. They couldn't unhear Colonel. Their power over me had cracked. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence was enough. Dad called me to the attic. I hadn't been up there in years. The stairs creaked under our weight. Dust floated in the sunlight like tiny ghosts. He opened an old trunk, its hinges groaning in protest. Inside were uniforms neatly folded. Medals, some still gleaming. Letters yellowed with age. He handed me one. "Read it," he said. It was from a soldier he had saved. The handwriting was shaky, the words raw. "You pulled me out when no one else would," it said. "You didn't just save my life. You gave me a second chance." I read it aloud. My voice cracked halfway through. I didn't try to hide it. I let the tears fall. Dad didn't comfort me. He didn't need to. That letter did more than move me. Changed me. I didn't want to be just the quiet one anymore. I wanted to be someone who made a difference. Someone who stood for something. That night I sat at my desk and searched for leadership programs. I found one nearby, intensive, challenging, designed to push people beyond their limits. I enrolled. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. The next morning I woke before sunrise. I ran laps around the block. I started reading books on strategy, resilience, communication. I practiced speaking in front of the mirror even though my voice still trembled. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. About becoming someone I could respect. Someone Dad could respect. One evening I walked into the living room sweaty from training. My aunt glanced at me then looked away. My cousins didn't say a word. I didn't care. I wasn't looking for their approval anymore. Mom noticed though. She handed me a glass of water and smiled. "You're changing," she said. I nodded. "I want to." She didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Dad watched me from the porch. He didn't say anything. But the next day he handed me one of his old journals. "Might help," he said. It did. It was filled with notes, reflections, lessons learned in the field. I read every page. I highlighted passages. I wrote my own thoughts in the margins. One entry stood out. Leadership isn't about being loud. It's about being clear. That became my mantra. Weeks passed. I kept training. I kept reading. I kept growing. I didn't announce it. I didn't post about it. I let my actions speak. One afternoon I walked into the kitchen and found my cousin staring at one of Dad's medals on the shelf. He turned to me. "I didn't know," he said. I shrugged. "Most people don't." He nodded slowly. "You're different now." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That night I sat with Dad on the porch again. He handed me another photo, this one of his unit, smiling despite the mud and exhaustion. "They were good men," he said. I looked at the photo then at him. "You were a good leader." He smiled just barely. "Now it's your turn." I didn't know what my path would look like. But I knew I was on it. And I knew I wasn't walking alone. Dad handed me the photo, his fingers lingering on the edge before letting go. I studied the faces in it. Mud-smeared, exhausted but smiling. "They were good men," he said. I nodded, still absorbing the weight of everything he'd shared. The porch creaked beneath us as the wind stirred the trees. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Something had shifted inside me and it wasn't going back. 3 months later I opened my inbox and stared at the subject line. Youth Leadership Summit Speaker Invitation. I blinked, reread it, then clicked. My mentor had nominated me. They wanted me to speak. Not just attend, speak. I sat there for a long time, the cursor hovering over the reply button. My heart thudded in my chest, not from fear but from disbelief. I hadn't chased this. I had simply worked. Quietly. Consistently. I didn't tell my family. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wanted them to hear it from someone else. Let the news arrive like a ripple, unexpected and undeniable. That was my quiet revenge. Not loud, not cruel, just undeniable. The summit was held in a grand hall downtown, the kind with velvet curtains and polished floors that made your footsteps sound important. I arrived early, clutching my notes, though I knew I wouldn't use them. I had rehearsed my story 100 times. In my head, in the mirror, in the silence of my room. When my name was called, I walked to the podium, the lights warm on my face. I looked out at the crowd, young faces, curious eyes, mentors seated in the back. I took a breath and began. I spoke about silence. About being overlooked. About the strength it takes to stay quiet when the world demands noise. I didn't name names. I didn't point fingers. But I told the truth. I spoke about resilience, about finding strength in stillness, about the moment every fork froze midair. The room didn't move. Not a cough, not a whisper. When I finished there was a pause, just a beat, and then they stood. Applause filled the hall, echoing off the walls. I stepped back, heart pounding, not from nerves but from release. Later that evening my photo appeared in the local paper. A small column tucked beside the weather forecast, but it was there. My name. My story. My face. My aunt saw it. He called my mother. I wasn't there to hear the conversation, but Mom told me later. She didn't know what to say, she said, folding the paper and placing it on the counter. The next family dinner came 2 weeks later. I walked in wearing a simple black shirt, sleeves rolled, posture straight. I didn't feel nervous. I felt ready. The same cousins were there, the same aunt, the same table. But the energy was different. They tried to joke again. Light teasing, the kind that used to sting. But it didn't land. I smiled, responded clearly, laughed when I wanted to. I looked them in the eye. Not with defiance, but with clarity. I wasn't angry. I was above it. My aunt asked about the summit. Her voice was careful, like she was stepping around glass. I told her it went well. She nodded, then changed the subject. I let her. I didn't need her validation. I had already earned something better, self-respect. After dinner, while the others lingered over chai, one of my cousins, Zane, pulled me aside. He was the one who used to mimic my voice, the one who once said I'd never lead anything but a line at the grocery store. I saw your speech, he said, eyes downcast. I didn't expect it to hit me like that. I waited. I was cruel, he added. We all were. I'm sorry. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch. Then I nodded. Thank you, I said. I didn't forgive him, not yet. But I appreciated the honesty. It was the first crack in the wall they had built around me. The next morning I sat with Dad on the porch again. The air was crisp, the sky pale blue. He handed me a cup of tea, the steam curling into the air. We didn't speak for a while. Just sat. Then he looked at me, eyes steady. You've become someone, he said. I smiled. I had good examples. He chuckled softly. You didn't need them. You were always someone. They just didn't see it. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth settle in my chest. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their praise. I had found my voice. And I had earned my place, not through noise but through quiet strength. That evening I walked past the dining room and saw my aunt folding napkins. She glanced at me, then looked away. I paused, then stepped in. I'm speaking again next month, I said. She looked up. Another summit? I nodded. This time it's national. She didn't respond. Just nodded, lips pressed together. I didn't wait for more. I walked away, each step light, each breath steady. In my room I opened my journal and wrote one line. They never saw me coming. But I was always on my way. And I was.